What are your 3 favorite sandbag power building exercises? If you asked me this question a couple months ago, I think my answer would have been pretty much the same as it is now, but my reasoning would have been a bit different. I've always been a huge believer in specificity. If you want to become powerful, you need to work with power-based movements. If you want max strength, you need to lift max weights. While I do still think that's true to a point, over the last few months, I've come to realize everything is a lot more interconnected than I once assumed. The sandbag to shoulder was and still is the most fun thing I've ever done in the gym. Pretty much all of my attention for a long time has been focused on improving it, and because I lift with an explosive style, I've spent a large part of my training time doing explosive exercises for specificity and carryover. Training that way worked, and it made me a lot better at shouldering sandbags. There's no denying that. Well, just about 5 months ago, I went all in on strength endurance, and for the most part, stopped doing explosive lifting altogether. You might have seen the box squat stuff I've been up to recently. I just did a set of 256 reps with a 175-pound sandbag at a body weight of 168 pounds. There is one power-based movement I've kept up with. I'll talk about it later in the video, but for the most part, other than a few times when I needed footage, I didn't do any explosive lifting from the lap or the sandbag to shoulder at all. 95% of my effort was put towards strength and strength endurance. I'll be honest, I was a bit worried I'd lose some of my explosive power doing this. Strength endurance and power are completely different things, but it turned out the opposite was true. I recently spent some time working with the sandbag to shoulder again, and my power level seems higher than ever. Focusing almost everything on strength endurance made me more powerful. Who would have thought? I think this is sometimes overdone. I'm sure you've heard the extreme example, just improve max strength and everything will get better. If you can lift 500, then 300 will become an explosive lift. As if max strength is the universal cure-all for whatever ails you. I wouldn't go that far. Obviously, to perform certain things, you still need to practice them, especially when it comes to skill-based stuff. Squatting 600 probably won't automatically mean a high vertical jump, for example. You need to actually jump to master jumping, but at this point, my own experience shows that extreme specificity might not be as important as I once thought. Everything feeds into everything else, and improving one thing is likely to improve another. That, or the sandbag box squat is just an overpowered exercise. That's entirely possible too. With this in mind, my favorite exercises for improving max power might not actually be power-based movements at all. I'd be confident in choosing something that focuses more on building a strong base, something like a box squat or a carry, both of which make you strong everywhere. Actual power exercises are fun though, they work, and I'm happy to talk about them, so I will. I just thought my recent findings were cool, and I wanted to share them with you. Before getting to my 3 favorites, I do quickly want to mention that I'm leaving my preferred sandbag to shoulder method off the list. That's probably my favorite exercise ever, but I've already talked about it many times. Instead, I'll focus on other things today. On the topic of shouldering sandbags, the first power building exercise on this list of 3 is a specific sandbag to shoulder variation, the one motion lap to shoulder done with an underfilled sandbag. The one motion lap to shoulder with an underfilled sandbag forces you to be on top of your game at all times. If you don't bring every bit of power you have every time you attempt it, you will fail. With an underfilled sandbag, most of the energy you put into a lift is absorbed and dampened by the shifting of the sand. It takes considerably more force to lift an underfilled bag, meaning not only does this exercise work max power, but it lets you do so with lighter weights, and lighter weights means less total fatigue. That makes this a great choice for anyone who wants to get some quality power training in, while also focusing heavily on something else. I've also found that spending a couple weeks with this exercise makes you feel like some kind of all-powerful strongman when you go back to the regular sandbag to shoulder with a tightly packed bag. It's crazy how strong you feel when the sand behaves how you want it to after fighting against it for so long. I should mention that filling a sandbag to about 75 to 85% capacity seems to be the sweet spot for underfilled sandbags in my experience. If there's too much space in the bag, it will be unusable, but if it's filled too much, you'll lose out on the extra benefits. The technique is pretty basic. When going for a one motion from the lap, I like to start with the sandbag in a vertical position and use a bear hug grip. This is the most straightforward starting position, and lifting a sandbag from here doesn't require any special techniques. Lift the sandbag up in a straight line and you're good. Start with the sandbag as close to your body as you can get it. It should be wedged tightly against your stomach, and the bottom edge should be all the way up against the crease of your hips. Even if your sandbag isn't very wide, I recommend reaching your arms as far around it as you can, until the point where your scapula is completely protracted, shoulders all the way forward. From here, take a deep breath and brace your core, shift your hips back as far as you can get them, and I mean as far as you can, even if your torso ends up pretty much horizontal to the ground. The further back you go, the more spring-like you become. Once you're there, quickly reverse the motion, violently extending your hips, and throw the sandbag up towards your shoulder. It's helped me to imagine the movement as a vertical jump. With this exercise, you need to think as much about the end of the lift as you do the beginning. If you brought some real power, that sandbag will come crashing down onto your shoulder with a lot of force. You can't go through that passively. The catch is at least as important as the jump is. For that reason, I'd recommend keeping most of your attention focused on bracing your core. Thinking jump and brace always leads to me feeling powerful and stable with this one. For this movement, I recommend doing singles with 1 to 2 minutes rest between reps. There are a few reasons for this, but the easiest explanation for why is that a sandbag exercise like this one is about combining ballistic power with heavy weights. Like an Olympic lift, the one motion lift from the lap to the shoulder is all about accelerating as quickly as you can with a heavy weight. It's a combination of the two. The end goal of this exercise is the shoulder. You want a weight that's heavy enough to require everything you have to reach the shoulder as the end point. That's what makes it unique. If you wanted, you could go lighter and do the sandbag over shoulder, which is great too, but having the shoulder as the end destination lets you combine heavy weights and explosive power together, and I've found that has a lot of carryover to other heavy sandbag lifting exercises, more so than throwing around lighter sandbags does. That's why I like singles. If you can throw a sandbag from your lap to your shoulder 3 times in a row, then it probably isn't heavy enough, and you probably aren't actually putting forth max power. If you did, the sandbag would end up traveling over your shoulder, rather than landing on the shoulder itself. I realize that was a long explanation, and I hope that made sense, but that's why I like singles with 1 to 2 minutes rest between reps. Truthfully, if we wanted to get really specific, we'd rest much longer than 1 to 2 minutes so the body could fully recover everything it needs for true max power, but most of us don't have 3 hours to train, and the shorter rest times still work well. This exercise is about as straight to the point as you can get. There's very little technique involved, it's power down to its core, and it will make you more powerful. The second exercise is easily my favorite on the list in terms of straight up fun. There's nothing else like it, and nothing feels more satisfying than getting that perfect lift. The second exercise is the throw and catch, aka the sandbag hang clean. The throw and catch takes the raw power of the first exercise mentioned today and combines it with a bit of technique and precision. To me, it feels even more like a jump than the one motion lap to shoulder does, and I often find my feet actually leaving the ground when doing it. If you're someone who wants most of the benefits you get from the full sandbag to shoulder, but you don't want to put in the time it takes to master the movement, or if you have some kind of pre-existing injury that makes the full shoulder difficult, this exercise is a great alternative. Start with the sandbag horizontally on your lap, bring it as close to your body as you can get it, and drape your arms as far over top of it as you can, until the point where your shoulders are fully protracted. Even if the sandbag isn't too big and it seems unnecessary to reach your arms so far forward, doing so will help a lot with power production. I believe this is part of what makes sandbags special. Because they're so bulky, thoracic extension, or extending the upper back, is built into many of the exercises. By reaching your arms all the way forward, protracting your shoulders, and rounding your upper back, you end up with an extra reserve of power. You can try this yourself now to see what I mean. Imagine you have a sandbag on your lap, and that your goal is lifting it high up on your chest. First, keep your shoulders in a neutral position and lift the sandbag. Not too bad. Next, move your shoulders completely forward, round your upper back, and again lift the sandbag. This should feel much more powerful. You should have noticed that by protracting your shoulders, you got an extra push at the end. That makes all the difference. Initiate the movement by first reaching your hips back, then extending your hips, while at the same time pulling the sandbag up with your arms and rotating one side up higher than the other. Once it reaches max height, reach one arm underneath and catch it against your body with an over-under grip. The sandbag should land on your upper arm, not your forearm. If you can't bring a sandbag high enough to catch it high up on your chest and with your upper arm, reduce the weight. Catching it with your forearm or even with your hand is risky. The point is absorbing the weight with your entire body, not trying to catch it in some kind of extreme overloaded curl position. Like with the last movement, there's a lot of impact here, so you'll want to focus on keeping your core braced as you catch the sandbag. Also, like the first move, I mainly prefer single reps with 1 to 2 minutes rest between reps. If there was ever an exercise that mimics getting tackled or pushed by someone, I think this is it. That sandbag comes flying at you with a lot of force, and you'll have no choice but to learn the proper way to absorb it. If the idea of general durability appeals to you, I think you'll like this one. I also believe starting with a sandbag in a horizontal position on the lap just lends itself better to power. It can feel awkward at first if you usually lift from a vertical position, but once you get it down, there's nothing else like it. The combination of hip drive and the arms pulling on the sandbag so it rolls up the body is really unique, and if you're going for max speed with heavy weights, the horizontal starting position can't be beat. Just my opinion based on my experience, of course, but if you haven't been doing any explosive horizontal lifting from the lap, I think it's definitely worth the time investment to learn how to do it. Before getting to the last exercise, I have to give an honorable mention to the high pull. The high pull has been with me for many years now at this point, and it's done a lot to make me more powerful. The high pull is essentially a less technical version of the throw and catch. Toss the sandbag up, let it drop back down, repeat. I'm a huge fan of the exercise, but if I had to choose between it and the throw and catch, I think I'd have to pick the throw and catch for the simple reason that it has a clear end point. Because the sandbag must travel very high for you to catch it with an over-under grip, you have no choice but to bring max power on every lift. With the high pull, you can get away with being lazy because there isn't a fixed end position. Again, they're both great movements, but for today at least, I think I like the throw and catch just a bit more. The final exercise for today might come as a surprise. Where the first two movements were obviously power-based, both in many ways like a jump and a throw, this one doesn't necessarily have power built into it. When done with heavy weights, it becomes more like a pure strength exercise than anything else, but when you go a bit lighter, you can get pretty explosive with it. This is the one power-based move I've kept up with over the last 5 months during my strength endurance training, and I believe it's done a lot to keep my power level high. The last exercise is the one motion lift from the ground to the chest, aka the row morning when done from a horizontal position on the ground. The one motion ground to chest has its place on the list for one main reason. It lets you build max strength off the ground with sub-maximal weights. I did an experiment a couple months back where I focused a lot of my attention directly on the lift from the ground. I wanted to see if I was actually correct in thinking the lift from the ground is the most systemically fatiguing sandbag exercise you can do, and I was right. Doing a lot of volume lifting heavy sandbags from the ground sent me into overreaching territory within 2 weeks. My total volume was the same, I just spent more time on the lift from the ground rather than other things, and it didn't work out so well. Side note, leverages could be at play here. Someone with a different body shape might not be as affected by this as I was, just something to consider. During the strength endurance box squat program I've been doing, I knew this had the potential to be a huge issue. Too much time spent lifting heavy sandbags from the ground paired with high rep box squats was a recipe for burnout. That said, I still wanted to improve my strength off the ground. That's where the one motion ground to chest comes in. Even when done with the most amount of weight possible, the exercise still forces you to use lighter sandbags than you would when lifting from the ground to the lap in the normal way. When done with sub-maximal weights, the one motion ground to chest becomes the perfect balance of everything: explosive lifting, strength off the ground, and reduced fatigue. There are 3 different methods you can use to do the exercise. You can start with a sandbag lying flat on the ground horizontally or vertically, or standing upright. When done from either of the 2 basic positions lying flat on the ground, the exercise is very much like a row and a good morning. Row the sandbag to your chest while maintaining a horizontal torso angle, and once it reaches your chest, perform a good morning. From a standing upright position on the ground, grab the sandbag with a bear hug grip, pull it close to your body, and simultaneously push the ground away with your feet and drive your chest up until you're standing completely straight. Whereas the first 2 techniques were made up of 2 distinct parts, this variation is more like one fluid motion. Each variation is great, and I think it's worth spending some time with them all. This exercise teaches you how to lift explosively through a long range of motion, which I think makes it pretty unique. The other 2 exercises on the list are kind of one and done, one burst of power and that's it. The one motion ground to chest forces you to keep pushing for longer. It's a great developmental tool. It teaches leg drive, builds strength off the ground, as well as general starting strength. It's a great more out of less weight exercise, and it has the potential to build a lot of muscle. As with the other 2 exercises listed already, to keep the power level high, I prefer doing these for singles with 1 to 2 minutes rest between reps. One last note on this one, the exercise can be tough on the upper arms, especially when using either of the 2 basic variations. For this reason, I highly recommend doing some lightweight, high-rep band curls before you start and during your rest times with the one motion ground to chest. That will go a long way towards keeping you healthy and injury-free. And there you have it, my 3 favorite sandbag power moves, for now at least. Quick announcement before ending the video. You might have noticed I've been using some new sandbags lately made by Freedom Strength. First, I'll say I never thought I would be. For some reason, whenever I see a lot of people excited about something, my first instinct is to run in the opposite direction. And especially on Instagram, it seems like everyone is obsessed with these things. Well, as is often the case, when people like something, it's usually because it's good. I recently had the chance to try Freedom Strength sandbags myself, and I can honestly say I see what all the hype is about. Up until this point, I've never associated associated myself with any one company. I've done some basic Amazon affiliate stuff, and I've recommended Iron Mine sandbags to a lot of people. I still will, but actual products have never been something I've talked much about. I've had a lot of companies reach out, but I've always wanted to maintain the integrity of this channel. I don't care if I'm offered a lot of money. If a product is inferior or I don't care to use it myself, I'm not going to talk about it. Well, I recently had the chance to spend a day with the owner of Freedom Strength, and he won me over before I even lifted one of his sandbags. Not only does he run the entire company himself, it's just him, and he's a very nice guy, but he's the only person I've ever talked to in real life who's as excited about sandbags as I am. It became clear right away he makes sandbags because he genuinely likes them. About the sandbags themselves, most of you know I'm a huge fan of the Iron Mine bags. They've always been my favorite for the sandbag to shoulder, and I think they still are now. This is due to the shape. I've always found fixed weight bags like Cerberus tough to handle because they're so wide, but the Iron Mine bags are thinner and taller, which makes them easier to manage for a non-strongman sized person like myself. Freedom Strength sandbags fix the problem too. I believe this issue is actually a big part of why Freedom Strength came to be in the first place. The owner of the company had the same issue I do with wide sandbags, so he created a fixed weight bag that's skinnier and taller. Because of this, I find Freedom Strength bags much more enjoyable to lift than the other fixed weight bags I've tried. I'll also say if there was ever a sandbag that was overbuilt, and I mean that in a positive way by the way, this is it. There's even an extra liner bag within the main bag to prevent dust from leaking out, and the locking system is really high quality. I also like that the texture of the bag is pretty rough compared to others I've tried, which helps a lot with grip. It's obvious to anyone who's been lifting sandbags for a while that these were made by someone who knew what they were doing. Long story short, the owner of Freedom Strength is awesome, and the sandbags are really high quality, so for the first time, I feel completely at ease and justified in partnering up with a company. If you want to try out Freedom Strength sandbags yourself, I put a link to them in the description. Use code STONE to save some money if you're interested. I will continue to recommend the Iron Mine sandbags as well because I love them. Just so you know, they will always be my favorite adjustable sandbag, but if you're looking for a fixed weight bag too, I think Freedom Strength is the best. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.